Welcome to the Happy Idaho Podcast. I'm Annie, and in this series, I'm sitting down with Antonin Felicetti of Soil to Soul to talk about something that most of us don't think about, but interact with every single day. And that's our food, not just what we eat, but how it's grown, where it comes from, and what we've lost along the way. We're looking at our food system through a different lens, part history, part lived experience to understand how we got where we are today and what it could really look like to build something different. This is not just about food, it's about our health, our land, our community, and the way that we all live together. We're using Idaho as our backdrop here, but these conversations really reach far beyond that. So, whether you grow your own food, shop at a farmer's market, or you're just starting to question what is on your plate, then you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Everybody, let's welcome Antonin to the podcast.
Hello.
Hey. All right. So, Antonin, take us back to the beginning. We want to know who you are and kind of like how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So I grew up in Boise, Idaho. I grew up in a city. I did not grow up in an agriculturally minded family. I ate typical American food. I grew up with three brothers. So with four growing boys in the house, we ate a lot of Costco food. We ate like Little Caesars pizza. We ate the typical standard American diet. When I was 15, my youngest brother was 7. He was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune inflammatory gastrointestinal disease. And the doctors told my mom that they were going to have to operate and remove part of his colon. And my mom, who doesn't really have any kind of a medical background, she's a graphic designer and an artist. She was like, I don't think that's the way to do it. So she connected with Elaine Gottschall, who's a gastroenterologist who was studying more of the effects of food on the microbiome. And following her diet protocol, my mom was able to heal my youngest brother of an incurable disease at the time through food, and really focusing on the foods that were feeding the bacteria and fungi that were living in the body. So that really awakened in me this passion for understanding more about the human microbiome, the soil microbiome. And I ended up going to school for pre-med and psychology, and then transitioning more into nutrition and gut health. And then eventually kind of had this awakening as to like, well, if I'm making these claims around food, where is my food actually coming from? And I really didn't know. So I became a farmer. I was a farmer for about a decade. And during the time that I was a farmer and even growing up, I had a big passion for cooking food. I grew up in an Italian family, and I love feeding people. And I worked in a number of kitchens, and I also got to see the quality of the food that was being brought through most of these kitchens and how low the quality of food was. When I was a farmer, I was able to supply some really amazing restaurants, but also due to the sale of the production of local food, I became that most restaurants that are making the claims of using local ingredients actually just aren't able to do that because it's so difficult to access consistently and at scale the amount of local food that they would need to supply the restaurant. So I ended up living at an eco village where there were 50 people living on 87 acres, and we had a small educational farm, and we provided like CSA boxes of food to people in our community. And we would host different kinds of community events. We would host drops, we would host dance parties. And I loved the process of sourcing as many local ingredients as I could from our friends and our farm to feed people at these events. Having been kind of a farmer and a chef and seen different facets of the food system at this point, I've started to realize that growing food, producing food, and cooking food are things that were shared by most people throughout most of history. And we're in a weird time period right now where a small handful of people are responsible for the labor of those things. And a lot of people are missing out on the physical and spiritual side of nourishment that comes along with producing food and processing food and cooking and sharing food together.
That's fascinating. I haven't had a conversation with anybody when they bring in the spiritual side of, would you say farming or like farming, producing, like cooking food as a whole?
I think it's our interaction with food in general. I think food is an extension of an ecosystem. Um, there's a living network of systems, all of the other animals, the sunlight, the water, the geology of a place that are responsible for food being able to grow. And the food that's grown in different areas has kind of different flavors depending upon the soil that it's grown in, the area that it's grown in, and different foods will grow in different areas. It's like you have tropical fruits that'll grow in tropical areas, but won't really grow somewhere that it's cold. And you have things that'll grow in the cold that won't grow when it's warm. So I think food is a larger extension of place, but it's also kind of an extension of the energetics of that place. And if you look across history and across the planet, the cultures that people had, the diversity of cultures that expressed on this planet were kind of a reflection of the foods that were available to those people depending upon where they were at. A lot of the art, music, dance, culture, spirituality, religion related to food and the other living beings that were part of their individual kind of like microcosm.
So fascinating. So when, like, do you think that there was like a breaking point of when you realized, or like a tipping point or a rabbit hole, if you will, of when you kind of realized like our food system's really messed up? Like, what
Um,
was that? When did that happen?
yeah, so I was in college and I was reading a book by Michael Pollan called Food Inc. And it really broke down the industrial agriculture model, how industrial agriculture is a product of a lot of these technologies that were developed during World War II. So they took these wartime technologies and applied them to soil and applied them to agriculture. And then it also talked about how the people involved in the food system are largely mistreated and exploited. So, like 7 of the 10 lowest paying jobs in the country actually are our food system, from growing and picking and processing to transporting and cooking and serving our food. So it was fascinating to be this young person who had all of this like I thought I was going to save the planet. I thought I was going to become a farmer. I thought I was going to become a homesteader. I thought, oh my gosh, I have all of the solution. And then I realized pretty quickly that I was very naive to the larger picture, which is that this stuff is meant to be done in community. This stuff is a foundational point of culture. And when we remove ourselves from it, we're missing out on something. And when we try to almost shirk that responsibility onto other people, we're oftentimes taking advantage of them or taking advantage of their community.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I know this is a little bit of a side tangent, but I came across a video the other day of a farmer out in Mountain Home. I think Idaho 6 News put this out. And she was saying that with all of the deportations, she can't find farm workers. And she's like, all of my best employees are these immigrants. And she's like, I can't get Americans to come work my farm. And I've kind of heard this story before, but how do you feel about that statement? Like, what do you like? Where's the issue? Do you think that is an issue with like the disparity between our food systems?
Yeah, I think there's a classism that kind of buffers most people from really understanding how food is produced and the amount of labor that it takes to produce food. Producing food, particularly at an industrial scale, is not something that's beautiful. It's not something that's fun. It's not something that like you're like wake up excited and you're like, I want to do the same repetitive motion all day for days on end for pennies on the dollar. So most of the people who are actually willing to do that labor, which mostly sucks, are immigrants. And so we've created this like class separation where there's the white people who are living in a community who are affluent enough to not have to work these jobs, relying on a small group of mostly minority people who are kind of the backbone of our labor force for agriculture currently. So some things need to change. Uh, big things need to change, but one of them is that the scale of agriculture that we're using might need to be shifted. We might need to shift away from these large corporate mega farms, and we might have to have smaller, maybe collectives or cooperatives of family owned and operated farms or community sized farms, in order to scale the work back, the production work back, to a size that's approachable for people, to a size that's sustainable for people, to a size that's fun. If you look across most of history, people were doing the work of agriculture together. They were doing it in a way that was more enjoyable because they were able to do it at a smaller scale.
That was going to be my next question, is like, how did food and community work together before agriculture? But I think you just explained it, where it was very community orientated and it was fun. Like,
Yeah. If you think about it at a like a community scale, and I'm not necessarily talking about like row crop agriculture, but if you look at even like hunter gatherer communities, there was a study done where they were doing about 12 hours a week of community food procurement. So in the 12 hours as a tribe and community, they were able to collect enough food and process and preserve enough food for them to survive and often thrive. And then they could spend a bunch of their time on art and music and culture and ritual. And you had much more almost like culturally advanced people because they were not spending all their time. If you transition to like looking at, let's say like feudalism, where there was serfdom, where you had people who were kind of the lower class, the working class people. They were working in kind of like, I guess, like slave type situations where they were producing food for like a wealthier class of people. I don't think that was necessarily very fun. I don't want to like glorify that by any means, but I think there are ways, and there were ways where more indigenous communities were spending a lot less time on food tasks, but the tasks that they were spending their time on, they were doing it together. It wasn't like a thing where they're like, 10% of our population is now going to do all of the work required to feed all 100% of us.
I love that. I know we hear all the time that like your local farmer was not made to feed the world. And we have a lot of local farmers who are doing that, or at least trying to do that on a big scale. Like they're doing the industrial monocrop agriculture. That's where I grew up. My grandpa was a rancher and a farmer, and he would rent out his farmland when he wasn't having his cattle graze on it to massive monocrops of, alfalfa, corn, wheat, all the things. And, as a homesteader, that's something that like I definitely don't want to do. Like I love seeing the biodiversity. And I think we do really lose a lot when like every place is eating the same thing. Like when you could eat potatoes everywhere that, are the same potatoes. And you talked earlier about how, certain foods don't grow in certain climates. So everywhere has like a different taste, even down to the soil, it has a different taste. And I'm just wondering, like, what do you think we lose when every restaurant or every place like tastes the same?
Well, I think we lose the like spirit of the food and the individuality of the place. And I think part of that, like, it revolves around the storytelling. I think when you are raised in a place that has more of an intact food culture, you are learning from your elders about different kinds of food, and you're eating these foods that are from where you're at, and there are kind of stories behind them. Like they're living containers for memory. And I think about like, if you like go to an Italian restaurant, or you go to like a different kind of cultural restaurant, you're going to have like flavors that are actually rooted in the land where these people are from. Like I think about what I'm doing, the work I'm doing here in Idaho specifically, and in the Treasure Valley. I'm learning about flavors that maybe were used by past cultures here, or maybe they're flavors that were used by another culture in another place, but we're kind of reimagining them and remembering them so that they can become part of the palette. Like if, let's say you're an artist and you have all of these different colors that you're painting with, and let's say, you have colors that are going to be unique in a culinary sense to where you're at. So some of the flavors and things that we can produce here and that we can weave into our food and the storytelling of our food are going to be different than maybe like 100 miles to the east or 100 miles to the west, based upon the kind of individual climates that we're in.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your dinners. Earlier, you talked about, the gut microbiome. And I love that you don't use any seed oils at your dinners. Like, I think that's incredible. And it's something that's really important, in today's age when there is so much food and food like products that does disrupt our entire system. So walk us through what your dinners, like the purpose of your dinners, the goal that you have for bringing community together, but also like everybody I'm sure would love to hear about how you go about sourcing and building a menu. Like, how does seasonality affect like how you create your dinners?
Yeah. So the intention behind my dinners is to bring people together to share food from local farmers, ranchers, and producers, to share food that kind of carries the energy of the land here. I kind of think about like the land and the water and the air and the sunlight of this place specifically, almost like crystallizing, through the code of DNA into these plants and these animals that we're getting to eat. And it carries kind of the resonance of this place. And so it's important for me that the people who are living here kind of get to tune into the frequencies of this land via the food that they're eating that's also coming from this land. And also the good energy and the love of the people who are producing it. Water carries memory and structure. And the living essence of food that's being cared for by people who really love it and care about it can be felt. And that's something that I wanted to kind of curate. I feel like beyond being a chef and a farmer, I'm a steward of culture at this point. So I'm creating moments in time where people can get together and kind of remember and reimagine, like, what is our culture here. And for me, culture is rooted around food. So we're getting together, we're sharing food, we're listening to music from live local musicians, we're enjoying non-alcoholic beverage pairings, and then we're eating food that's healthy and nourishing and is good for our gut health. That's also something that's really important. And then within that, I like to weave in new flavors that maybe people haven't tried before, and ferment things and unlock different flavors and make food that's more bioavailable to people. And then it's also kind of to light a little bit of a spark and a fire within other people to participate in this system. I don't think that food is something that's meant to be relegated in that classist sense to just chefs or just farmers. I believe that it's like everybody grows up with this birthright that you can be an artist, you can be a singer, you can be a dancer, because art and music and song are things that are just inherently human. Well, I believe that like food is inherently human. Having a relationship with the land around you and food kind of being a container for that is something that's a human right. So I think more people would benefit from participating. And I think for a lot of people, they don't even know where to begin. They don't know where to go to get their hands in the dirt. They don't know where to go to learn skills around these things. So that's been kind of a larger vision of mine, is curating spaces and maybe creating some kind of center where people can come remember these skills together and figure out how to plug in and participate in ways that feed their bodies and feed their spirits.
That's beautiful. So I want to talk about the center, but I'm also curious how, being a farmer, how do you go about choosing what farms or where you get your own food for these dinners? Like, what's your research process? What conversations are you having at the market or with different farmers and vendors to kind of like make sure that they hit your checklist of like, okay, this is responsible, sustainable, organic, local? How do you go about sourcing?
So yeah, local is important to me. But also like how are they treating the soil? How are they treating the soil microbes? Are they applying chemicals to the soil that are going to damage the soil, or are they using compost? I'm not so big on the strictness of the organic certifications, because there are plenty of things that are organically certified that are also actually pretty harmful to life. So I want to know more about, like, what does it look like and what does it feel like on their farm? Is it a place where there's a diversity of life, where there's an abundance of life, where there are um, flowers and insects and other living things there? And then I think it's also about kind of the intentions of the people. Like, they could have a beautiful farm, but are they a person that is happy and living a life that feels like they have joy in their heart? um, and and beyond that, like, I like to see animals that are raised on grass and on pasture and being rotated around. uh, yeah, I mean, I think it's everyone is growing, and there are people who are great farmers and great people who are doing the best practices that they can at the time with the infinite dynamics that are involved in agriculture. And I'm not a black and white person. I'm like, what is the intentionality and integrity of this person and the food that they're producing? And also, how willing are they to be open about the things that they're working on and growing with? There are a lot of things that I don't know about different kinds of agriculture because maybe I have not raised those animals, or I don't know that specific crop because I haven't grown it myself. And I default to stepping back and listening to the farmer and trying to learn more about why they're making the decision that they are, instead of just like throwing them to the wayside because they're using a certain pesticide or they're doing a thing that I'm like, I'm never going to eat a food that's had an antibiotic on it or a vaccine in it. It's like more of like learning about why farmers are doing what they're doing, trying to be understanding, and then from there making a decision. Okay, is this something that I feel like is with integrity, like why they're making this decision, or maybe this is a food that I don't want to eat. So yeah, like it's not easy. It's not like a labeling system is going to fix that for us. It's about the relationships. For me, it's about like having a relationship with the farmer and developing that relationship over time and getting to know them, getting to know what they're producing. And that's something I think that's beautiful about this valley, is like, you can go to the farmer's market and you can meet the farmers, you can talk to the farmers, you can go to most of the farms. Like Boise is a very friendly and inviting place, and the community around here is very open and transparent if you're willing to ask the right questions.
Yeah, I get that question a lot from people, especially on my Annie's Homestead page, where they'll, hit me in the DMs and they'll be like, where do I even get started? And I mean, that's a really loaded question, because I always tell people, like, you can start exactly where you're at. We all typically have a kitchen in our house, right? So you can start learning how to cook, how to ferment. There's so much that you can do with a kitchen. But I really encourage people to go to their farmers market and to talk to your farmers, because that's gold. It's incredible. And a lot of these farmers are so open about, their growing practices and what they're doing. Like, there was a farmer at the market, and I had asked them, like, oh my gosh, your garlic is so good. It's so big. And he just went on into telling me like his whole process for his garlic. And I didn't even ask him. Like, they're so forthcoming. And I think that part of community is kind of what a lot of us are lacking in today's society. So You talked a little bit about your vision for this learning center, and I'm really curious, like, what do you envision for the future? Would you call it food education or agriculture education? Like, what kind of niche is this like fitting into?
Yeah, it's it's cultural work. It the
So
skill
good.
set the skill set is around it's around food. Um, but it's more like restoring culture. You go to different places in the world and they have different culture. They have different foods. They have different art and music and dance. Um, so I think the foundation of that though is the food. So I think it's uh, providing spaces where people can learn how to grow food around them. And I think particularly in America where we're at is um, teaching people how to be able to grow food in urban and suburban settings. Whether that's a community gardening type situation or whether that's just being able to grow food around their house and to feel confident with the skill sets to produce healthy soil and to tend to plants that operate differently in different seasons. Um, so I think growing food is a focus. Then I think preserving and processing food. So let's say you get an abundance of local food from a farmer's market, or you go to like a U-pick or you go foraging. How do you take the food that you have and prepare it in ways that are nourishing, like fermentation, like canning, things like that, and also like cheese making and processing small animals and curing meats. I think those are all things that you find around the world in different places that we've kind of like lost or we've taken a step back from and been like, I'm going to get sick if I try to do that at home or by myself. And so, how do we help people remember how to do those things in ways that are safe and they're going to be successful and they're going to have skills that they can pass on to their children? Um, so, it's kind of like reigniting that cultural engine and helping to restore like the cultural scaffolding where you have elders who know things who are teaching those to future generations. We're blessed in this world and community where we still have some elders and we have some people who know some really cool things. So giving them a platform where they can teach and pass along this knowledge. And then I also think about it being kind of like a third space where it's a place where people can gather together. They can work on these different kinds of educational things together, but they can also share food together. So I've thought about having like a little cafeteria, having an event space where people can gather together for like larger dinners, like my dinners. Or maybe we could bring in guest speakers or we could show documentaries. Um, and then I think also having a little retail component where people can come source local food. Like, let's say they get done with this class and they're like, I don't know where I can buy local milk or local cheese or bones to make bone broth. Like having some of those things available for purchase for people. Or maybe they're like, that was great. I just made bone broth, but I don't think I have the time or energy or resources to make that. Where can I buy that? So I think kind of weaving in the different networks. And it doesn't all necessarily have to be in one space, but I think having some kind of aggregate hub system also just of resources, whether that's in a physical space or online, to showcase the people who are already doing amazing things here in the Treasure Valley. I think that's really important because there are a lot of awesome things already happening. There's a lot of great classes. There's a lot of great producers. But yeah, let's say you're taking somebody who's new to all of this. It's like, how do you plug them in? Well, I'd like to have one place where we drop them in and they're like, okay, here's kind of where you start. And here are the resources that are already available. So they're not like on their own trying to hunt things down.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible vision. One of the things that you talked about was processing animals. And I know for a lot of people, they haven't done it. And on our homestead, we process our birds. So we do chicken and duck and goose. And we, incubate the eggs. So from day one, these eggs, are cared for. We raise them through chicks all through, their life until they are ready for dispatch. And to me, like that is like as close, that is the source. And it's as close to a relationship with food that I can have. Like I'm not going to the grocery store and buying, an already processed chicken. Like I'm growing it and nurturing it myself. And our process on the homestead is we love to process and dispatch birds on a really sunny day, just because we like to hold each bird and we'll say our Thanksgiving, and then we use kill cones. So then we'll put them upside down in a kill cone, and that helps like calm them down. All the blood rushes to their head, and then we'll just do a quick cut to the throat and let them bleed out. So our dispatch process as a whole is actually like very slow on the homestead. It's just me and my husband Chip. And it's a somber day, but a day filled with a lot of gratitude and thanks. And one of the things I really want to add to our homestead is meat rabbits, because they're incredible. Like they reproduce fast. They have a cold compost. Like their poop is cold compost. Like I don't have to, heat up and process their compost like I do with chicken waste. So I guess my question is like, if people wanted to start getting into processing and dispatching like small animals per se, are there any kind of resources or anything that, they could read or watch that would help them get through that first? Or, I mean, every dispatch it's not fun. So how do you walk people through that?
Yeah. So I've taught all different kinds of processing, and I participate in a lot of processing. And I think the best thing to do is just get hands on, like find places where you can learn, find people that you can learn with in person. You can learn a lot by watching YouTube videos, and that's really helpful. But these are skills that are hands-on skills, and they're skills that you're going to feel in your heart when you're talking about that kind of somber feeling. Um, they're not easy, and they're also not for everyone. Um, I've done enough at this point to know that there are some people who it's not for you, kind of thing. And then there are some people who are like maybe more buffered to it, or like they're able to just sit with that grief and kind of hold it and process it and let it go, because there's no circle of life without death. There's no food without death. And I think that's a beautiful thing about other cultures is most intact cultures have more of like a ritual structure to processing animals, and a way to honor the life and also kind of grieve alongside that loss of life. So I think it's something that, yeah, like when you're doing it by yourself, you kind of learn your own practice. Like you talked about how like you kind of reflect on and give a little bit of thanks for that life that is becoming you. I think that the best place to do that is to find other people who are doing it. And that's part of why I want to curate spaces for this. And why I've offered classes in this is because it's important to get hands-on and just to do it yourself. And yeah, and it's something that, having done it hundreds of times, every time I do it, it's still kind of a new learning experience. Every life is different. Every body is different. So yeah, I would encourage people to find other people who are doing it and ask like, hey, could I come watch? Could I come participate? Because most people who are doing these things really want to share. Another place is, so this shirt actually I'm wearing is from a camp called Sharpening Stone. And it is a kind of ancestral skills gathering, and people get together for a week and share all kinds of skills around food and animal processing and starting fires and blacksmithing and like using plant dyes and all kinds of different like things that are kind of ancestral skills, like things our ancestors probably knew so that we could be here now. And they do some great animal processing classes, and then they'll take the animal and they'll teach you how to use every single part of that animal. And I think it's a really beautiful process.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible. We'll have to link some information on that. So anybody else who's curious about that, can find that. So where is that located? Is it in the States?
Yeah, it's outside of Grants Pass, Oregon, Southern Oregon. And
Cool.
there are a number of these gatherings around, I'm sure around the United States and probably around the world. But we're blessed. There's a lot around the Pacific Northwest. There's one called Rabbit Stick in eastern Idaho. There's Saskatoon Circle. There's Between the Rivers. There's one called the Seastone Camp on the coast of southern Washington. So this is kind of a big thing right now. I feel like people are really hungry for this knowledge and hungry for the community around it. And there are some great gatherings where people can go get hands-on and learn some really cool things.
That's really cool. So you do a foraging class locally. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in this valley, largely very disconnected from the local plants. Um, I was a farmer and raised a lot of plants, and a lot of the plants that I had picked and threw away as weeds were actually edible. And I had no idea. And one of the ways that I found out first was I went through a pretty bad leg injury where I was on crutches for about 4 months. And I was going stir crazy at home. So I decided, why don't I get on my crutches and go crutch around the foothills? Why don't I go to the botanical garden? And I had walked around the botanical garden plenty of times as a kid, and I'd never like stopped and read the little signs. And there's a bunch of signs at the botanical garden that explain how the indigenous people use the different plants that are growing there for food and for medicine. And so I remember the first time I was there on crutches and I walked through and I read every single sign. And I was like, I know these plants. I've seen these plants all over. And the wheels start turning. And I'm like, I should be eating these plants. I should be using these plants. And so I got a little book on like edible wild plants in the Boise foothills. And I would go walk around and I would find these plants and I would try cooking with them at first. And some of them are not super great depending upon if you get them at the right time of year or not. And so it's just this exploration. And I feel like kind of once you get an itch for something, nature gives you feedback. So I'd be walking around and hiking and I'd find a plant or I'd look at a plant and I'd be like, I wonder if that's edible. And so I'd like figure out what kind of plant it is. And then I'd go online, and we're in the information age right now. So I'd go online and I'd be like, is da 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 edible? And then like you pull it up and it's like, yes, it's edible. And then you look down below it and it's like, here's 4 recipes with this plant. And so I'm grateful for all of the other people who have gone before, who have inspired in me the playfulness to try out different things. And maybe I'd see a recipe and I'd be like, okay, well, this thing is kind of like that thing, so I bet I could do this to it and it would probably taste pretty good. And most of the time that was actually the case. And so it just unlocked a whole new like level to the things that I could add to my culinary palette. And now some of my favorite seasonal flavors are things that I go out and forage. And so I love taking other people out to learn about the local plants here and how they can use them. And yeah, we've got 2 more foraging classes coming up in May. And then my goal is to just do 2 a month, probably until October and November.
That's really cool. So you talked about how like some plants, depending upon what time of year, like might not be the best tasting. So I find that interesting. How do you know? Like, do you just do research, and how do you know when to like pick and harvest?
I think research, I think spending time with other people who have more experience and more skills. And then I think there's a little bit of intuitiveness to it also. Like if you're picking something where you're picking like you're going to eat it and you're going to saute it, and you kind of like one of the things I think about is like milkweed, because it's a thing that most people think is poisonous, and you can actually eat the young shoots of it and you can eat the little seed pods. Well, it's like when the seed pod is fully developed, it's pretty dry, and like you could harvest one and you'd be like, what part of this do I eat? So I think you're like, maybe that's not a good thing to eat. But if you get them when they're small and they're soft, You're like, okay, I could see eating this. It's kind of like an okra almost. And the same with the shoots. Like if you were to go to a mature plant and like try to like cut it up, and like you're gonna have a hard time just even chopping it up. Like it's so woody. But if you get them when they're little, they're like almost like asparagus, and they're like they snap right off, and it's pretty easy um, to harvest them. And so I think there is an intuitive side to it, but I think for the most part, when you're dealing with foraging, uh, find somebody who's already doing it, read a book, go on a foray with an expert, um, and you're gonna have a lot more success than if you're just like out there trying to figure things out on your own. Um, I also don't recommend that people eat things if they haven't properly identified them. Like there are people who be like, I think this is this, and then like they like take a bite of it, and it's like that is not the way to do things. That's a great way to get sick, or the what's the into the wild. It's the
Wild.
yeah, that you don't want. That's how you have a bad time. That's a French fry when you're supposed to pizza for sure.
I love that. So, one of your last dinners, you did a stinging nettle pesto, and it was delicious. It was incredible. So, how did you come up with that idea?
Well, that's one of the things that I had seen online before, and I had made a lot of basil pesto, and nettle is a pretty mild flavored green, and it's more about just knowing how to process it. So it has these little thorns that are high in oxalates, and it's not really a pleasant thing to eat raw. So you have to blanch it, and then you have to pick it all off the stems. And then once you have a green at that point, it's like you could mix in all kinds of things. You could make a soup with it. You could chop it up and put it in a chimichurri or a pesto. Um, it's it's just kind of a thing where when you have a little bit of kitchen knowledge, you can start to get more playful with things. But pesto is nice because it's already something that's pretty approachable. If you're adding basil into it, it's going to be a familiar flavor and a new way to kind of introduce an ingredient that isn't going to be off-putting to people. If I just handed somebody a leaf of stinging nettle and told them to eat it, they would probably look at me like I'm insane. So I think it's finding ways to make things approachable. And I feel like that's like a lot of the wild ingredients that I'm using. I'm not trying to have it be like an in your face, like you just ate what? It's more of like a like, oh, whoa, I didn't even know that I could like that thing. That was actually really good. And doing so in ways that are more familiar. That's not the point is not for there to be shock and awe, like I just ate a cattail or whatever it is. It's like, oh, cattail tastes kind of like corn or like a cucumber. So how would I prepare it in a way that kind of um, weaves that familiarity into the dish?
You've eaten cattail before?
Yeah, it's one of the things we're actually going to forage at our class tonight.
Oh my God. Okay. Tell me more about this. When do you harvest it? How do you harvest it? How do you eat it? How do you prepare it?
So there are three different things that cattail provides. When it's a young shoot, like this time of year, it's kind of growing up out of the water. You can pull it down very close to the base and snap it off. And about the bottom 2 inches or so will be white. And you can peel off the outer layer of it, and the inner core of it is a little bit crunchy, tender, and has this almost like a little bit spicy, kind of like a mustard spice mixed with a cucumber. And it's super good. You can ferment it, you can eat it raw, you can saute it, you can add it to salads. And then once it grows taller and before it puts out the forbidden corn dog, as they call it, kind of the top poofy part, um, the young shoot that kind of comes out of the top that will eventually contain the pollen and will contain that poofy part. It's green and it's thin, and you can prepare it kind of like corn. So you can like blanch it or like boil it for a little bit, and then you can throw it in a saute pan with some butter, and then you eat it just like corn on the cob, and it's fantastic. And it almost tastes kind of like corn. It's pretty wild. And then
Oh
the
my.
third thing you can do is when that pollen stem develops, you can knock off the pollen and you can use the pollen as like a flour replacement, but it's like really high in protein. Um, yeah. So
Wow.
cattails are like a major food source, and you want to be careful where you're harvesting them from. You don't want to harvest a cattail right next to the road where all of the pollutants have washed down into the water because they're going to pull that up into them. But if you've got a nice wetland area that's secluded that hasn't been influenced by toxins, they're a really great food source.
Wow, that's amazing. So you have a forage class coming up soon. What else are you guys foraging right now besides cattail and forbidden corn dogs, hot dogs?
Right now, this kind of time of year, there are different parts of the dandelion that you can harvest. There's Jim Hill mustards. You can harvest kind of the tops, like the little broccolini or the leaves of those. Um, there is nettle. There is white sage, which is our western mugwort. There is catnip. Um, there is some wild garlic, juniper berries. Watercress is popping right now. Horsetail, plantain, dock, the early like spring like dock leaves. And then if you can find any of the seeds, the dock seeds are really good too. Salsify is just starting to come up. Pretty soon, bachelor buttons will be blooming, and they're an invasive, so they're a great one to eat. Burdock. Um, I feel like that's a good starting point. I'm sure there are
That's a
more.
lot. So when you're leading these classes, are you just intuitively walking and whatever like catches your eye, you're like, okay, we're gonna forage this? Or do you have like a pre-planned path or a walk that you take a class on?
Everywhere that I'm walking, I've walked a lot. I walked for years. So I know kind of the plants that are in the areas. I don't necessarily know specifically where they're all at, but I know what's there. Um, and a lot of what we're doing in the classes is not harvest focused. So the way that I do the classes, the goal is not to take. The goal is to observe. It's to learn about the different plants, to um, kind of learn their likes and dislikes so that it's easier to attune your brain to finding them when you're other places. It's about responsible harvest. So, how do you harvest things in ways that are still going to leave a natural abundance? And then we do kind of like a reciprocity focus where we are giving offerings to the spirits of the land and the water. So we'll take seashells or stones or feathers, or we'll sing songs. So we'll come with an attitude of like, what are we giving back to the land, not like what are we taking from it. And I feel like that's really important as far as developing like a long-term relationship with foods of a place.
That sounds so beautiful. I have yet to join you on a foraging class. I never happen to be in town when they're happening, and I think I just need to schedule. I'm gonna book a time, and I just gotta come to town because it sounds so beautiful.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. And um yeah, it just makes me think about how, I mean, up until 200 years ago, the indigenous people were here in this valley, and they lived in this valley for 12,000 years in peace, and they knew the plants, and they tended to a lot of the wild spaces out here, kind of creating foodways where there are a lot of food and medicinal plants that were either planted by the indigenous people or are um, a product of like seeds of those plants that they planted. So you can go um, and you can, when you kind of learn what the plants are, you can see like, oh, like I'm in a garden right now. Um, And there's a lot of that here along the Boise River and in the foothills and up in the mountains. And it's cool waking other people up to that so that they can participate in that. And I think about foraging being one side of wild tending, which is actually like the act of actively participating in a foodway or a food ecosystem where you're spreading seeds, where you're spreading rhizomes, where you're planting things, and where you're kind of almost acting as the legs for the plants that can't move themselves. You're like a deer, you're like a bird, you're just another force that's kind of helping to encourage the abundance in an ecosystem.
That's so fun. Yeah, I mean, you really are being a cultural steward, as you had said earlier. So we're seeing a increase of people interested in farming and knowing, where their food comes from. Do you think, like, on a mass scale, that this knowledge is recoverable, or do you think that there's some things that are lost?
Well, I think that we're at an interesting time that's like it's like this interweaving. Like we have the capacity to um, uplift and kind of rekindle the indigenous knowledge of place where wherever people are at, as long as there's still kind of a thread tying back to that indigenous knowledge. Um, but we're also weaving in the stories and the seeds and the foods of our own ancestry. So I think everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. Um, like I think about myself, like um, all of the different plants that I've learned how to grow here as a farmer. Um, and like how could maybe I adapt those to a more wild setting, or how could I encourage those plants? So there's people who are like Joseph Lofthouse who are focusing on acclimating plants to live on their own in the wild, or to live on their own in agricultural systems where there's not really much human involvement. So maybe they don't necessarily need water, or they don't, need to be like tended. Like it's a thing where you plant it and then you come back at another time of the year and you harvest like a squash or like a tomato. Um, so I think there's like we're at this weird time of remembering and reimagining. So if you were to go back in time in this valley and area specifically, like I don't know, 500-600 years, and the people were tending to the wild spaces and they were harvesting the abundance of animals that were living here. Well, we don't have that abundance. They killed off all of the buffalo. We've removed a lot of the habitat for the grazing animals. We've largely depopulated the fish and the salmon coming up from the rivers. So if we want to imagine what the future looks like, we're going to have to restore kind of the integrity of those food systems and foodways. So that might look like us practicing regenerative practices now and thinking about, well, how do we take this land? How do we reinvigorate the commons, so to speak? So how do we take this land that's going to be this collective space, and how do we return the animals to it? And how do we start harvesting those animals? Like, is it, we have people hunting right now. How do we maybe make hunting? How do we have enough animals that we could make hunting more of a part of our food supply? We're not just going to all of a sudden tomorrow stop raising cattle and stop raising sheep, and like everyone's going to go out to the hills and like shoot elk and deer. Like that's not possible. So it's like, how do we imagine the steps that it's going to take and the generations that it's going to take to like get back into more of those rhythms, like those holistic rhythms of like interacting with the other animals that are our food.
Yeah, I would love for people to walk into a grocery store and like recognize like a lot of this like is not food. Like it's full of 90% food like products. And I think once we can make that connection of understanding that our local food system is important, and we can stop subscribing to these big conglomerates that are stealing our money and they're stealing our health. I think that'll be like that to me is like a really big tipping point for a lot of people is being able to unsubscribe from the things that don't benefit you and then pay attention to the things that do, which is, the culture, the local food, the foraging, the hunting, going to the farmer's market, supporting local, I think is making a really cool comeback. And I'm so here for it because we've been so disconnected for such a long time. And the way that society is built, like we don't have a lot of community. Like you talked about third spaces. And I've heard a lot of people talking about how like third spaces are going to be making a comeback. It would be so cool to see people hanging out if they want to hang out till midnight, but don't want to do it at a bar and don't want to be drunk, but want to be doing something fruitful with their time and indulging in community. And I really love your vision for the local learning center because there's so many moving pieces that go into curating a space like that. And there's so much that is going to come out of that. Like people are going to pour into it. And I think if you build it, they will come truly. Like your community is going to find that and they're going to fall in love with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it like the longhouses that held humanity through some of our darkest times. Um, the longhouse is something that you see in different cultures around the world for most of human history, and it's a gathering place, and it's a place that kind of is that rooting point of culture, of food processing, of song and dance and ritual, and we get to kind of like remember those spaces and curate those spaces. And you're also making me reflect on that, like where we're sitting right now and the like the position from which we're even communicating about this stuff is one of extreme privilege. Like we don't have to like be the immigrant people who are growing food and working a million hours just to feed our families. um, but the goal is that the systems that we create are accessible to people and are inviting. And like let's say you take somebody who's living in like the inner city and they have no experience with food and they're eating processed stuff like from a convenience store because they're in a food desert. um, it's like how do we curate spaces that are going to reach them and provide access to them and be inclusive? And I think about that a lot through the lens of like my mom for a time was like a single mom raising 4 kids and like didn't have the time or energy. Like if we had classes, like she wouldn't be able to attend them. So how do we create a space that like provides childcare and like has food accessible there and like is like welcoming and inclusive and supportive for people in general, not just like this small handful who have the time and the financial resources to participate.
Right. That's a really interesting take. And I really like that, where, we're speaking to these people who do live in a convenience culture. And I mean, that is just the culture that we all live in, like with 2-day shipping. And I mean, you can walk down the street or go into a grocery store and get just about anything that you need right away. And you can go buy bone broth on a store shelf and you don't have to, process the bird or the animal and make it yourself and spend all day, boiling bones. So I think it's really beautiful that with the local learning center, you're wanting to add in these extra conveniences to make it accessible. And it's really beautiful. Like that's what we need as a culture. Like we need ease of access for everybody. And with this center, I can just see it being so beautiful. Like really, truly like a heart of Boise where we
Yeah,
can recover more knowledge.
my hope is that, and what I have experienced is that whatever this desire to have spaces like this is, it's not just unique to here. It's something where people are hungry for this all over. And so my hope is that either we will create a good example of this and other people will come learn from it and start them in their own communities, or we'll be able to support these growing in other communities. And one of the things that came to mind to me was like, you think about like the YMCA, and besides the awesome song, everybody you talk to about a YMCA knows what a YMCA is because of that inclusivity, because of the benefits that they're providing to a community. And you're going to be able to go to a YMCA pretty much anywhere in the United States, and you're going to be able to access certain resources. You'll be able to find classes and there's like a focus on health. And so I think that's the goal, is to create centers and spaces that have that energy and that have kind of that consistency, where people know they're going to be able to come learn hands-on skills and be around community and find good food. I think that's really important.
Yeah. The steward of culture. I love it. So we are going to wrap up for today. Where can people find you on the internet, Antonin?
So we have a website now. Thank you to Morgan. www.soil2soulusa.com, and the 2 is TO. And Instagram, Soil2Soul USA. And I am working on a Facebook group currently as well. And then, we sell tickets to our events on our website and also on Eventbrite. And you can find me out and about by the river and in the foothills and at the farmers market in Boise and other places.
I know, you just go out and about and you'll run into Antonin somewhere, I'm sure. All right, guys, we will see you on the next episode. And if you have any questions, we are open for comments. So I'll turn comments on this and we'll get all of Antonin's information input here as well. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.